Great. Awesome. Just to get the ball rolling, could you maybe talk about, what is Backpack? How is it different? And what was the precursor to kind of make you want to build this?
Okay, starting with the easy question. So what is Backpack? I think the core thesis today about what we're building is this fundamental view of the world in terms of the things that you need for crypto to actually become part of the fabric of society. So I think it's very sober to describe the state of crypto as more or less, I guess, irrelevant relative to the grand scheme of things right now. I think the number people like to give is that all the value in crypto is less than all of NVIDIA's market cap. But I don't think that any of us that are here or work in the space believe that is going to be the case for very long. I think most of us believe that crypto is going to eat finance in particular in the same way that software kind of ate everything else. And I mean, a lot of, what we're building is fundamentally finance tech. And if you go into this version of the future where crypto is ubiquitous, it is responsible for really powering, the back end of much of the world economy and much of the global financial system that rules the world today. And you ask yourself the question, well, what are the companies and protocols that are going to be built in this world, and what are the various properties that they need? There's two properties that I find particularly relevant that everything will eventually revolve around. I think the first property and the most important property is censorship resistance. This is something that I think people like to frame in the context of decentralization, which is a spectrum. You might have one node, you might have 10 nodes, you might have 100, 1,000, 1 million, or 1 billion. And currently what you're seeing in crypto is a reversion to centralization, where people are basically saying, well, decentralization is a spectrum. It doesn't really matter that much. Let's just be as centralized as possible, and we'll do a couple clever tricks with cryptography, and everything will be fine and dandy. But if you take a look at basically what has happened to every single centralized exchange that has gotten to any type of meaningful scale, you will see that censorship is not a meme, it is the world that we live in, right? And censorship can mean a negative thing depending on how you frame the conversation, but it boils down to, like, are you following the law? I think, you see this all over the place. Most recently in Korea, a lot of, some of the world's largest exchanges got taken off their app store. You saw the same thing happen in Japan 2-3 months ago. You saw this in Europe, where the world's largest derivatives exchanges have all been, more or less, for lack of a better word, shut down. But censorship in finance is very real. And that's not because censorship is necessarily bad. It's just that you're expected, this is going to sound silly to anybody that's not in crypto, but you're expected to follow the rules and regulations of the country that you live in and that you serve users in particular. Anybody coming from TradFi will say this is blatantly obvious, but for folks in crypto, I think this does not become obvious until you reach escape velocity and you start actually becoming really relevant to the world.
I wonder if we can dig in a little bit, because you mentioned, hey, you're building a financial of the future and you want to be censorship resistant. So how does that, specifically apply to Backpack?
Yeah, so I think the way I would describe censorship resistance is you are so geographically distributed where the thing that you're building is simultaneously operated by everyone and owned by no one, that the whole concept of compliance is an undefined problem. It's like dividing by zero. It just literally doesn't make sense, because the rules that are going to exist in the US are going to be different from the rules that exist in China, which are going to be different from the rules that exist in the EU or Africa or South America or whatever. And so I think the conclusion is that, well, anything that's not censorship resistant will eventually be censored. And if you are not censorship resistant, then you have this other thing that you need, which is an alternative, which is ultimately to be compliant, which is a really important thing to have in the context of finance. And when we decided to build the exchange in particular, we looked around and concluded that there's a lot of really incredible companies and builders building great censorship-resistant tech, Sui being maybe one of the most prominent examples of a censorship-resistant blockchain that has the potential to really meaningfully impact the world. But there's not a lot of folks that are contributing on the compliance side of things. And that's where we've really felt like we can build a great team to contribute new things to kind of the various L1 ecosystems. And I think there's a bunch of different paths you can go down when asking the question, well, what does this path actually give you from a product perspective? But basically boils down to solving all of the hard and, to be frank, expensive and annoying problems that most traditional financial institutions have to solve, but doing it in a way that allows you to build compelling, cutting-edge crypto product. And I think maybe the starting point is really just the on and off ramp story, where if you want to have, relationships with banks and you want to be able to on and off ramp capital, say USDC into Sui, you need to KYC a user and actually build that intimate relationship so that the bank can trust the value flowing through their system. But I think there's a bunch of ways to have this conversation, but that's ultimately what we're trying to do on the exchange side. And I think kind of the way to frame the conversation is between censorship resistance and compliance. And depending on what you choose, you kind of get different outcomes in the product.
Yeah, I like the way you're reframing this statement, because oftentimes I do hear a lot of discussion between, hey, is central exchange the future or is this central exchange the future, right? So it's very black and white. Kind of I'd love to get your take on those definitions and how you see those, the exchanges will progress.
I think ultimately we're not going to think about DeFi or CeFi. We're just going to call it all finance. And at that point, what we've done has been, we as a collective industry has been successful. I'm a big believer in the DeFi mullet, where the user experience looks and feels like a centralized exchange. You might have all the amenities of a centralized exchange, namely on and off ramps, namely RWAs, real world assets like, tokenized equities or whatever, where you actually need that component. But on the back end, you're actually using, blockchains, and you might not actually even know you're using blockchains. And really the question when you're talking about these types of products is well, what's the catch? Do I lose self-custody? Am I just giving up on the crypto dream and just focusing on centralization? But it turns out you can actually solve every user experience problem that exists in crypto if you think about these products from first principles, and you start introducing concepts we can get technical if we want, but account abstraction and these types of things. But you can solve every user experience problem, and there's no reason why you can't build something that looks and feels like a centralized exchange, but that's using Sui on the back end.
Okay, awesome. Great lead up to my next topic. You have chosen to integrate with Sui and bet on us. Can you talk about why you're excited about Sui and why you chose to build on us?
I think the thesis behind Sui is really simple. I assume this is the thesis for many people, which basically boils down to the founding team is amazing, and it's kind of as simple as that. There's not that many extremely strong builders that are capable of building legitimate L1 networks where you can, not only have faith that what they're going to do is actually going to be technically innovative and push things forward, whether it's Move or, their, consensus algorithm or, the performance of the network more broadly. But yeah, it's just the founding team. It's kind of as simple as that.
Okay, awesome. I love to hear that. Well, obviously the topic of today's series of session is about the Sui Financial Stack, right? In your opinion, and I know that, you're really big on wanting to build a DeFi, or maybe don't call it DeFi, the general finance future. what are some of the things that you feel that might be missing that you are excited to build and you feel that Sui can help us get there?
I think the thing that I'm most excited about right now, amongst a lot of things, is reimagining wallets. I think with very few exceptions, all wallets are fundamentally broken. The whole concept of an EOA, namely this whole idea of a public key directly controlling assets, is fundamentally wrong, and that everybody that's doing this is going to be disrupted in some meaningful way going forward, and that almost every issue basically derives from that primitive that we have more or less followed from Bitcoin and Ethereum and Solana, and so on and so forth. And if you just make a small change, namely instead of the public key owning the asset, the smart contract owns the asset, then you basically can solve every UX problem that exists with wallets today. The incredible statistic that I was opening up a Solana wallet the other day and setting up a seed phrase, and when they remind you to save your seed phrase, they give you this jaw-dropping statistic. They tell you that $4.2 billion is lost every year to people that lose access to their self-custody or their seed phrase. It's the most spectacular failure of crypto by far. It's like wallets are basically just giving knives to children, and they're far more dangerous than centralized exchanges, if you believe that number. I don't know if that number's true or not, but that's what the wallet told me. Billions of dollars every year. It's really utterly terrible. And so that's, to me, one of the most important problems to solve, and you absolutely can solve it. And it's not until we have recovery that maintains self-custody with a really great user experience that we can actually start pushing crypto products to normal folks. And so I think reimagining wallets is one of the things that I'm most excited about, and really bringing together the centralized exchange and the wallet for a brand new kind of self-custody experience is really kind of one of the things I'm most passionate about right now.
Okay, yeah, so we're almost out of time, but I think a lot of the things you're saying is really interesting. You obviously have spent years thinking about this, right? So what I'm hearing is that, hey, we want to maintain censorship resistance. We want to maintain self-custody, but at the same time, we want to offer compliance and experience that's just really up the best of the best, and you don't have to really think about what's going on behind the scenes. So aside from kind of like, okay, better wallet onboarding, what are some critical financial infrastructure or perhaps compliance that needs to happen so we can get there?
I mean, in terms of infrastructure, the main primitive is, you can say account abstraction, basically a multi-sig controlling the assets is like the primitive that you need. I think the rest basically boils down to kind of execution and a desire to do these things. I think a lot of people, there's this weird dilemma, especially in the RWA world, where everybody talks about RWAs and everybody thinks everybody else is doing RWAs, but nobody actually is doing it. And you can see this happening in crypto since I came into the industry in 2017. Everybody's talking about the scaling problem in 2017, 2018, 2019. It's not until Solana comes off the back of DeFi summer in 2020 that they actually solve the scaling problem. And then Sui and Monad and these other kind of networks are then kind of doing their own versions of it. And I think that's kind of what we see today with RWAs. And so I think it's really like an execution game where you need people that care about these things for a long period of time, just grinding it out to do these many small, boring, but important problems. And I think that's kind of, at least our path forward.
Awesome. Well, do you feel like it's a execution on a developer builder side, or is it also just maybe waiting for the consumer to understand what the difference is?
I don't think you can ever wait for the consumer. I think you have to build something so compelling that the consumer is now kicking and screaming until they have it. And so I think it's certainly a product problem, an execution, on the engineering side, to build systems that scale, that build systems that are secure and safe and maintain all the things that actually make the industry special, namely self-custody, but also execution on the legal and the compliance side as well. And I think that is something that I think we are trying to do at a very high level at Backpack that I think most kind of crypto native companies don't do. And I think most folks that are doing the compliance stuff also don't do much of the crypto native stuff at a high level either. And so I think, if we can, do a lot of that hard work and try to I don't want to say shoulder the burden, but, try to bring some of that to kind of, L1 ecosystems like Sui, and have great on and off ramps, and bring things like RWAs on chain, and really start bringing, US capital markets into this new market structure that's, emerging worldwide on top of blockchains, then you can genuinely start fulfilling this story and vision that the industry has been trying to fulfill of, like, reimagining finance. And I think that's ultimately what we're doing here.